everyone, and welcome back to Toby Talks, the show where we dig deep into leadership, professional development, and process improvement in a way that actually breaks them down and helps them make sense in the real world. I'm your host, Toby Hoy, and I'm a little geeked out about today's topic. And I'll admit, it's a little nerdy, so I guess that makes me a little bit nerdy as well. I want to start with a quick question, and I'd like you to be honest with yourself here because nobody else can really hear you. How many browser tabs do you have open right now? Go ahead and count. I'll wait a second. If the answer is more than 10, then this episode was absolutely made for you. Even if it's less than 10, this episode is still for you because I have a feeling that your to-do list situation is a little bit more chaotic than you'd like to admit. There's no judgment. We're all friends here. Today, we're talking about Kanban boards. And before you click away because you think this is going to be some dry corporate project management lecture, just stay with me for a minute because this is one of those topics that where the simpler it sounds, the more informative and transformative it actually is. Kanban boards have been around since the 1950s. They're used by some of the most efficient organizations on the planet. And most people either aren't using them or they're using them just wrong. Today, we're going to try and fix that. By the end of this episode, you're going to understand what a Kanban board is, why it works, how to set one up, and some of the most common mistakes that teams make so that you can just skip past those and get straight to the good stuff. All right, so let's start at the beginning. Where did Kanban come from? To understand that, we need to go back to the 19th. World War II has just ended and Japan is rebuilding. And there's a little company called Toyota that's trying to figure out how to make its manufacturing process more efficient. And there's a brilliant engineer named Taiichi Ono who has been handed this particular problem and told to just go solve it. You might remember him from way back in episode 4 when we talked about lean. If you haven't checked that one out yet, there's a whole big bucket of excitement in there that will help drive a lot of this topic home. So you can pause this one and go check that one out and come back. So Ono is walking around the factory floor, observing how work flows from point A to B to C, and he notices something that just bugs him. The factory is producing parts based on forecasts. Someone from up the food chain decides how many parts they think they'll need, and the factory produces that many. And then those parts just sit around in inventory until they're needed. And here's the problem with that system. If the forecasts are wrong, and forecasts often are wrong, just look at the weather, you've either got way too many parts sitting around collecting dust, or you don't have enough parts and the whole line just stops. Neither outcome is great. So at some point in this process, Ono goes on a trip to the United States. And while he's there, he visits, of all things, an American supermarket. And he has this light bulb moment that I generally think is one of those, well, that's totally obvious moments in business history. He notices that supermarkets don't try to predict exactly how much of each product that it will sell. Instead, they just watch the shelves. And when the shelves start to get low, they restock. Customer demand pulls supply from the storeroom, not the storeroom pushing supply onto the customer. So it's pull, not push. That right there is the key insight. So he goes back to Toyota and implements a system where workers signal upstream when they need more materials or more parts. They use physical cards and to communicate this signal up the chain. And in Japanese, the word for signboard or sign card is Kanban. That's literally where the name comes from. So this card-based pull system becomes a cornerstone of what is now known as the Toyota production system, which eventually evolves into lean manufacturing, like I mentioned a minute ago, which eventually influences nearly every major operational methodology in the world. Not a bad day for a trip to the grocery store. So now, fast forward to the mid 2000s. A software developer and consultant named David Anderson looks at these Kanban principles and thinks to himself, hey, knowledge work has a lot of the same problems that Toyota was trying to solve back in the 40s. Our people are overloaded, work is invisible, and things are moving at the wrong pace. So he adapts those ideas into how software teams manage their work, and he publishes a book about it. And in 2010, that methodology absolutely takes off. Today, Kanban boards are used in software development, marketing, HR, healthcare, education, legal, and about 1,000 other industries that have absolutely nothing to do with the manufacture of Toyota Camrys. The core principles here have stayed remarkably consistent for nearly 80 years. Number one, make work visible. Number two, limit work in progress. Number three, let work flow. And number four, improve continuously. So we're going to dig into each of those today. But first, let's get concrete about what a Kanban board actually looks like. So physically, a Kanban board looks like any other whiteboard or big empty horizontal space. In its simplest form, a Kanban board is a visual tool that shows the status of all of your work at one single glance. Picture a big board, whether it's a physical whiteboard or flip chart or a digital tool on your screen, divided into columns. The most basic setup has 3 columns: to do, in progress, and done. Each piece of work then has its own card. On a physical board, that can be a sticky note. On a digital tool, it's a clickable little rectangle. And each card represents one task, one project, one thing that needs to get done. As work moves through its life cycle, that card moves from left to right across the board. It starts in the to-do column, and then someone picks it up and moves it to in progress. And then when it's done, someone else picks it up and moves it over to done. And everyone on the team can see exactly where everything stands at any given moment. That's the core of it. It's so simple that a kindergartner could set this up. And I mean that as a genuine compliment, not a dig, because I think sometimes we overcomplicate things in a way that makes them overall less effective. The elegance of Kanban is in its simplicity. Now, I can already hear some of you saying, but Toby, I already have a to-do list. How is this any different? And that's a perfectly valid question. So here's the difference. And pay attention because this is important. A to-do list tells you only what needs to be done. That's it. And a Kanban board shows you what needs to be done, what's currently in process, and what's finished, and more importantly, how work moves through your system over time. It's the difference to reading the back of the book and actually reading the book. A to-do list is a static snapshot in time. It doesn't tell you anything about flow, capacity, or where things are getting stuck. A Kanban board is a living picture of your workflow, and that distinction matters enormously for teams trying to coordinate complex cognitive work. Here's another way to think about it. A to-do list is a wish list. A Kanban board is a commitment board. When something goes on the board, it's visible to everyone. It has an owner. It lives in a column that tells everybody where it stands. That visibility creates a kind of accountability that a private to-do list simply can't match. So let's dig into what I think is one of the biggest superpowers of a Kanban board, and that is making work visible. Here's the thing about most modern workplaces. Work is invisible. People are typing. people sit on calls. Their calendar is packed and everybody is clearly busy. They're consistently busy and visibly exhausted. But can you actually see the work? Can you walk into a room or pull up a shared screen somewhere and immediately understand what everyone on the team is working on right now? For most teams, the honest answer to that is no. Work lot lives in people's heads. It lives in email threads. It lives in notes apps and spreadsheets and sticky notes stuck to the side of monitors. It's distributed, it's fragmented, and it's largely invisible to anyone other than the person holding that particular piece of work at that particular moment. The consequences of invisible work are massive. You get miscommunication, you get duplicated effort, you get things falling through the cracks because everyone just assumes that somebody else is handling them. You get those status update meetings where the first 20 minutes are just people trying to figure out where things stand before you can even get to the decisions that you actually need to make. When work is visible on a Kanban board, all of that changes. Everyone on the team can see what everyone else is working on at any given time. Everyone can see what's stuck. Everyone can see what's waiting to be picked up. And the board becomes the single source of truth for the team's work. And a lot of the coordination overhead that was just eating into people's days just evaporates into thin air. There's also a deep psychological shift that happens when you make work visible. When your brain knows that everything is captured on the board, it stops trying to hold it in memory because there's a concept in psychology called cognitive offloading, which is the practice of using external systems to store information so that your brain doesn't have to carry it. And when your brain isn't spending energy just keeping track of everything on your plate, it has more bandwidth for the actual thinking and doing that creates value. This is why so many Kanban practitioners say that they feel less stressed once they get their system set up. Not because they have less work, but because they've offloaded the mental burden of just tracking all of that work onto the board. Their brains get to breathe a little bit again. I remember the time that I set up a proper board for a team for the first time that I was leading. And the immediate reaction from people was something like, I had no idea we had that much in progress. And that conversation right there, that single moment of shared visibility was more valuable than a dozen status meetings because suddenly everybody could just see the problem together in real time and we could start talking about it honestly. So now we're getting into one of my favorite Kanban concepts, and it's the one that tends to make people just a little bit uncomfortable the first time that they hear it. We're going to talk about WIP limits. WIP stands for work in progress, WIP, and limiting it is one of the absolute most powerful but counterintuitive things that you can do for your team's productivity. Here's the idea. Each column of your Kanban board has a limit on how many cards it can hold at any given time. When a column is full, nothing new can be added to it until something moves forward. Your WIP column has a limit of whatever it is. Let's just say it's 3, and you literally cannot start a fourth thing until one of the existing 3 is moved over to done. Now, I know there's at least one of you out there that says, but Toby, I have 15 things that are all urgent, they're all important, and they're all due by Friday. How am I supposed to limit myself to just 3? And I hear you. I really do. Because we have all been trained to believe that more activity equals more productivity, that being visibly busy is the same as being effective, that multitasking is a skill that is worth bragging about on a resume. But here's the hard truth, and I want you to really sit with this for a second. Multitasking is largely a myth, at least for complex cognitive work. What we call multitasking is really just rapid task switching, and it's incredibly costly in terms of mental energy and time. Every time that you have to stop and switch from one task to another, your brain has to stop and reload the context for the new task. There have been studies out there that have found that this context switching overhead can eat up to 20% of your productive time on any given week. And for really complex, cognitively demanding work, that cost is even higher. So think about a busy freeway. When there are just a handful of cars on the road, everyone moves around at full speed and traffic flows smoothly. As you add more cars, everyone slows down a little bit. And then you add more cars and slow down a little bit more and more and more. And then you get gridlock. You get the 710 freeway in Los Angeles at 5:30 in the afternoon on a Friday. Nobody is moving, but somehow everybody is technically on the road. They're technically busy. Does that sound familiar? Your work pipeline is exactly the same. When your team is juggling 15 different active projects, everything slows down to a crawl. Delivery times stretch out, quality dips because nobody has the bandwidth to think carefully about what they're doing. Mistakes creep in. And ironically, by trying to get more done at once, you end up delivering less. WIP limits force focus. They force the team to finish things before starting new things. And this is where one of the core mantras of Lean and Kanban really come into their being. Stop starting and start finishing. Say that to yourself again. Stop starting and start finishing. It sounds almost too simple to be a real insight, but watch how most teams operate for even just a week, and you'll see how revolutionary this concept actually is. Most teams have a compulsive need to start new things. There's a new shiny object, let's go chase it. A new idea, let's start it. A new request comes in, let's get it. There's a kind of psychological comfort in starting things because new things feel exciting and possible. It's like that first real day of spring. Finishing, on the other hand, requires dealing with the hard part, the feedback, the revisions, the final detail work, the handoff. Finishing is where the real friction is, and WIP limits force you to face that friction head on instead of escaping it by starting something new. When you implement WIP limits and actually stick to them, something really interesting starts to happen. Work starts to move faster, not because people are working harder or working longer hours, but because everyone is working on just a few things, but with more focus. Bottlenecks become visible almost immediately because when one column is constantly full while others sit empty, that right there is where your constraint lives. And once you can see the constraint and manage the constraint, you can actually address the constraint. And for more information about constraints, go back and check out episode 13. We just did a whole thing on constraints. So let's spend a few minutes on the cards themselves, because this is an area where teams often will cut corners and it ends up costing them in the long run. The bare minimum for a card is the name of the task, the thing that you're doing. But if you stop there, you're leaving some value on the table. A well-designed card should also include a brief description of what done looks like for that specific task. I know that sounds kind of obvious, but until you've been on a team where two people have fundamentally different definitions of done for a specific task, it's not. I've seen this particular issue cause some absolutely spectacular disagreements, and none of them were ever productive. The card should also include who's responsible for it, not just who created the card, but who's actually accountable for doing the things to get it done. It needs to list any relevant deadlines or priority signals or levels if your company uses them. Another thing about cards, they should be sized appropriately. If a card is sitting in progress for 3 weeks, it's not a single task, it's a project in disguise. Open it up, break it down into multiple cards. The general guideline is that most cards or tasks should be completable within a couple days. When cards are smaller or tasks are simpler, work moves across the board more frequently, giving everyone a sense of momentum, and it keeps the board feeling alive rather than stagnant. So let's talk for just a second about using Kanban for yourself as an individual, because this is something that doesn't get enough attention, in my opinion. You don't need a team to benefit from making your work visible. A personal Kanban board is one of the fastest ways to bring clarity to an otherwise chaotic personal workload. My personal setup has 4 columns: the backlog, this week, today, and done. On Sunday evenings, I spend a few minutes moving things from the backlog to the this week column. Every morning, I spend a few minutes over coffee moving the things from this week to the today column. And then I only work, or try to only work, on the today cards. This practice forces a daily prioritization in a way that a traditional to-do list never really does. I can't tell myself everything is equally important anymore because I physically can't fit everything on the today column. I have to make real decisions. I have to triage. I have to do this every single morning. And the backlog column becomes a guilt-free place, a guilt-free parking lot, if you will, for ideas and future work. Things go there without pressure. I'm not ignoring them. I'm not doing them. I'm being intentional about when they move forward. And occasionally I'll go through that backlog and realize that some of those things don't need to happen anymore, and then delete. And I've got zero guilt with that delete. It's kind of satisfying to do that. That feeling right there, it's worth the price of admission. So let's start talking about tools, because eventually you have to pick a place to put your board. If your team all works in the same physical location, seriously consider something as simple as starting with a physical board. I know that sounds low tech and analog and backwards. And I know you're probably used to reaching for an app, but a physical whiteboard with sticky notes is always visible. Even a big empty wall with some painter's tape to establish the columns will work perfectly. It doesn't require anyone to log in. It doesn't require MFA. It doesn't require a thumbprint. People just walk past it and they naturally start talking about it. And there's something about the tactile satisfaction of moving one sticky note from one column to the next, to the next, to the next, that a click just doesn't replicate. If you work primarily on a distributed or hybrid team, a digital tool is the practical choice. Now, I don't get paid or anything for any of these, but I use 3 of them every single day in one capacity or another. Trello is the easiest entry point for almost every team. It's free for basic use. The interface is almost identical to an actual board, and you can honestly be up and running in about 10 minutes. If you've ever used a Kanban tool before, start with Trello. Jira or Git are the heavyweights in the world and primarily used in software development, but I've seen other industries use either or both of them pretty well as well. Asana, Monday.com, ClickUp, and Notion all have some sort or flavor of Kanban view already built in. Microsoft Planner is worth considering if you already live in the 365 ecosystem. I'm assuming that Apple and Mac have one as well. I personally don't live there, so I don't know. Most of them all have a freebie plan of some variety that should be enough to get you rolling. When it comes to tools, my honest advice is don't spend 3 weeks evaluating every single one. Just pick the one that seems the most reasonable and start using it. You can change it afterwards if you need to. The board is the system, not the software. So let's dive into the mistakes, because teams make the same ones over and over and over again. And if I can, I want to help save you some headache. Mistake number 1 is they have too many columns. Start with 3, maybe 5 at the max. Add more only when the workflow, the flavors of in progress, genuinely require it. 12 columns is not more sophisticated, it's just more confusing. Mistake number two is ignoring the WIP limits. If you set a limit of 3 for any one column, but you've got 8 cards in that column, all you've proven is that limits are optional in your culture, and optional limits aren't limits. They're suggestions. Stick to the limits, period. Mistake number 3 is not updating the board at all. A stale board is worse than no board because it shows a picture of reality that doesn't match reality. Keeping the board current has to become a team value, not just a request. And it has to start with leadership visibly modeling that behavior. Number 4 are cards that are too big. If a card hasn't moved in 2 weeks, open it up and break it down. Mistake number 5 is treating the board as a one-time setup. Kanban is a living system. It should evolve as your process evolves. Review it regularly. What's flowing well? Where is work getting stuck? Where's the choke point? What adjustments would make things move through the process more smoothly? This habit of continuous improvement is actually baked into the Kanban philosophy. The board is never finished. So before we wrap this up, I want to give you a little bit of context on why this matters right now in this specific moment that we're working in. Remote and hybrid work have fundamentally changed how teams coordinate, and they're here to stay. When you're in the same building, there's a natural ambient awareness of what's going on. You overhear conversations. You pick up context in the hallway or the parking lot. You see someone's whiteboard and those horrible sticky notes that are surrounding their monitor. But that ambient awareness is largely gone for distributed teams. And what most teams reach for when they lose that organic communication is meetings, more meetings, longer meetings, status update meetings, meetings to prep for the next meeting, and meetings after the meeting to recap the meeting. I'm not anti-meeting. I'm anti-useless meetings. Meetings have their place, but status update meetings are one of the most expensive uses of time in the modern organization. When you add up the company's hourly cost for everybody by salary and bennies and everything else, and multiply that by the number of people, time spent just getting everyone on the same page about where things stand, that number can be generally eye-watering. A well-maintained Kanban board eliminates almost all status update meetings because the status is always visible to everyone. Questions that would have required a 30-minute call can be answered with a 10-second glance at the board. That's time back for your people. That's energy preserved for work that actually requires human judgment or conversation. Okay, so action plan time. And I want you to do this today or tomorrow, not next week, today or tomorrow. Block out 30 minutes, a half of a miserable hour. Get your team together, either in person or on a call. Pick your tool, whether it's a whiteboard and sticky notes, if you're all together, Trello, if you're remote. Create 3 columns, the to-do, the in progress, and the done. Write out a card for every piece of work that you can think of that is actually going on in the world today. 1 task per card. Move everything that's actively being worked on by somebody to the in progress column. Look at how many cards are in that column, and then set a WIP limit. For a team of 4, something like 5, 6, maybe 7 cards max for in progress is a reasonable starting point. Now stop and take a look at your board. Does it match reality? Is there anything missing? Are there cards that are in the in progress column that haven't moved in a while? Start asking yourself those questions with some regularity. The board will show you the things that you didn't know that you didn't know. So use that board daily for 2 weeks. Check it at the start of each day, update it in real time, and reference it in discussions. At the end of 2 weeks, step back and assess. Make any adjustments, and then just keep going. That's it. That's the whole plan. I want to close this out by leaving you with the core principles one more time, because these are worth repeating. Number one, visualize your work. Get it off of everyone's plates and onto the board where everyone can see it. Number two, limit your work in progress. Stop starting and start finishing. Number three is to manage flow. Pay attention to how work moves and do something when it stops moving. And number four is to improve continuously. The board should evolve as your process evolves. So that, my friends, is Kanban. 80 years of wisdom packed into principles that you can start applying this afternoon. So if you give this a whirl and you find that you love it, come and find me on social media and tell me about it. And if you try it and you hate it or you're struggling, come find me on social media and tell me that too. I really want to know how it's going. And if you're in that struggling category, I'll even help get you sorted out. So that's a wrap on today's episode of Toby Talks. If this was useful for you in any way, please share it with somebody else who could find value, or leave a review wherever you listen. And I'll catch you in the next episode. In the meantime, take care of yourselves and keep getting better. And remember, stop starting, start finishing.